Hey everyone, and welcome back to Real History. I'm your host, History Professor Jared Frederick. And before we delve into our latest reaction video, I want you to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already, and tell us what you'd like to see next in some of our upcoming episodes of Real History. Our selection today is a reaction video for the forthcoming biopic entitled Lee, which is a biographical film about photographer, model, and war correspondent Lee Miller, who is played in this film by none other than the great Kate Winslet. Lee Miller was an exceptional individual. I have long thought that her life story is worthy of a motion picture, and we certainly have a great actress portraying a great woman. And I think one of the very telling things about this film is that it is going to be chronicling her wartime experiences as a photographer for Vogue magazine. And I think one of the things to keep an eye out for in this movie are the various relations and interactions that she has with the powers that be. Because as I have mentioned on a number of occasions in my book, Dispatches of D-Day, which is in many ways a newspaper history of the Normandy invasion, female correspondents had a really tough time navigating this terrain because they were working their way through two male-dominated fields, one of which was military bureaucracy, and the other of which was journalism and print media. And so these are some of the inner struggles that female correspondents were going to have to confront. So without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the trailer for Lee. Sky Original, that's an interesting choice, not a studio that I was expecting.
You must be Lee Miller.
It's a war zone, Colonel. Just Lee is fine.
Just Lee. We don't send women to combat.
Colonel of Masters of the Air. Ooh.
Well, that's a problem, because I'm here.
Welcome to Vogue magazine.
I hear you're the woman to see about a job.
Audrey Withers. Yes, I am.
I've seen your photographic work. You're really very impressive. You dislike anyone who questions you. Especially when you know you're wrong. And you have secrets. Many.
No shortage of good-looking people in this movie.
I'm never wrong.
That's our Lee.
It happened so
The
slowly.
Blitz.
Yeah, kind of overnight.
We woke up one morning and Europe was at war.
Only non-military access for women.
I just want to do my part. Why should the men get to decide what that is?
I'm heading to the front. Ready to go?
That's not what I thought you were gonna say.
We drove into the worst of it all.
Materially, this movie looks great.
Need a light over here?
Here.
I stay away from that window.
They got snipers.
They're gone. Everyone's gone.
Marion Cotillard.
Even when I wanted to look away, I knew I couldn't.
It was not something I'd heard about or imagined. It was real.
Wow. What a great-looking cast. Something that I think is notable here from the outset is the really great attention to detail and material culture. Like, these people are wearing the right helmets. Lee's character has the right sort of photographic equipment. She has the U.S. war correspondent patch on her uniform. It just looks really good. You could really tell that somebody did their homework. It's so easy to get that sort of stuff wrong in war movies like this. One might think that this is a little bit of embellishment here as we see her being blown back by the concussion of a shell. But Lee Miller really was in the thick of it. She arrives in Normandy just a few weeks after the D-Day invasion takes place, and she sees a lot of the fighting that is unfolding in hedgerow country, and she, by and large, moves right along with the Allied advance as it pushes closer and closer to the German border. So here we see Alexander Skarsgård, and he is playing a real-life individual by the name of Roland Penrose. And Penrose was this very scholarly gentleman who associated with Lee Miller on occasion. He was an artist, he was a writer, and he puts that artistic talent to perhaps good use during the war, because I suppose he helps to perfect the art of camouflage to an extent and how to experiment with it. So artists come in many forms in this film, no doubt. Another telling detail here is that we see, it looks like she's perhaps on a rooftop, spotlights are moving about, she's wearing a very recognizable British-styled helmet, and I fully suspect that her character is covering the Blitz in these scenes. So this is well over a year before America enters the war. But people like Lee Miller, perhaps even more notably at the time, people like Edward R. Murrow, their broadcasts and their imagery help bring to life the misery and the defiance that the British were enduring during the time of the Blitz. And so that will undoubtedly be an important bit of prologue as we take a look at this movie. This little bit of interaction here reminds me of some of the difficulties that other female correspondents encountered, people like Martha Gellhorn, who infamously was married to fellow war correspondent Ernest Hemingway, and their marriage had devolved not so much into a partnership between husband and wife, but a competition between rival journalists. But Gellhorn said something very poignant about her wartime service, and I paraphrase it here, but she said, "I have to go see these things, and I have to go see these things for those who cannot see for themselves." And certainly Lee Miller felt much the same way. Although it may not seem like an ideal casting decision, I really like the idea of Andy Samberg playing the war correspondent David Sherman. Sherman and Miller were very dynamic partners, professionally speaking, I think, during the war years. And perhaps the best example of this is at the very end of the war, where he perhaps takes one of the best known photographs of war's end. And I won't ruin it for you. I'll let you see that moment in the film. But there's a very famous moment where Lee Miller bears all, so to speak, and becomes part of the story herself. I sense that this movie is going to have some emotional punch here and there because Lee Miller does help to chronicle some of the immediate aftermath of the Holocaust. And during her time overseas, she helps to chronicle both the liberation of Dachau and Buchenwald. And so we get a very subtle hint of this here in the latter parts of the trailer. So all in all, I'm quite impressed with this trailer. I find it really odd that one of the major studios isn't releasing this film. I mean, this is some high caliber quality stuff with a lot of heavy hitter actors. But we'll see. We'll see how the end product turns out. Like I said, a number of things that stand out to me. It looks like good material culture detail, good production design, certainly fantastic casting. And I guess some of the things to keep an eye out for, everybody looks good materially, but I'll be interested to see how a lot of the military scenes play out. If you haven't studied World War II tactics to an extent, it's really easy to get it wrong and possibly make it look hokey on the big screen. And so we'll see how the final version handles some of this subject matter. I'm also really interested to see how journalism and the value of it is highlighted in this film. As I mentioned a little bit ago, the value of journalism as it was perceived in the 1940s is a major highlight of my book, Dispatches of D-Day. So I'm fairly familiar with a lot of these characters and their work, and how it was important in regard to truth-telling, but also sometimes propaganda purposes. I'll be interested to see how the movie balances that sort of dynamic. And then finally, I think what excites me most about this movie is that it is so rare that we have a war movie, or at least a movie set during World War II, in which we have a strong female protagonist as the main character. Wars are historically fought by predominantly men. There are often not a lot of depictions of women or having their voices to a heavy extent in those sorts of depictions, and this movie kind of goes against the grain in that regard. And along those lines, I think it's very different, and it has a lot of potential as we think about the historical legacies of World War II and how we, over 80 years later, visually remember how that conflict played out. That wraps it up for this reaction on Real History. If you haven't done so already, once again, hit that subscribe button below. We look forward to seeing you next time here on the channel. And until that time, stay curious.